everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie K, this is my big chair, and I read Silver Elite by Dani Francis so you don't have to. This is part of a series that I like to call One Star Book Club, which is where we read popular books from Book Talk or BookTube and talk about whether or not they are worth the hype. And I can definitely say with full confidence that this book is definitely not worth the hype. Even worse, I feel like books like this that are being published and pushed out to the masses is just proof that we are in the darkest timeline. After reading books like Powerless and Fourth Wing, I did not think it would get even worse, and I was sorely mistaken. Before we dive into the story, I do want to warn you guys that there will be spoilers ahead. So if you are genuinely interested in exploring this book on your own time, I would invite you to sign off from this video and come back once you are done reading it. Also, I do want to warn you guys about some very sensitive topics that will be brought up throughout this video, including but not limited to attempted assault, guns, violence, war, torture, classism, fascism, death by firing squad, and attempted rape or assault. I think those topics are going to be way too tricky for you to listen to. I'd invite you to sign off and come back when you're in a much better mental space. Otherwise, let's get into it. If you enjoy this video, make sure you let me know by leaving a like down below, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and comment down below the answer to today's question. What is a major pet peeve of yours in books today? And I'll go first. My biggest pet peeve has been this rising, disturbing trend of what I like to call Nazis are people too sympathy trope. This is a trope that has been explored in books like Powerless, even Fourth Wing, and this book is no exception to that trope slash trap, and I was honestly very surprised by how much this trend is taking off, especially in today's political climate and with our knowledge of fascism and the Nazi regime, and I find it to be incredibly disturbing and also perplexing to see all of these authors humanizing and sympathizing with the Nazi regime or the fascists way more than the victims of genocide. And this new trend is really a huge head scratcher because don't get me wrong, I do love a good redemption arc. I love seeing a character develop over time, realizing that they were in the wrong and make the leaps and bounds and whatever necessary steps they need to make in order to rectify all of their past misdeeds. Zuko from Avatar comes to mind of an excellent character development about a child who was indoctrinated by these imperialistic ideologies of the Fire Nation after he was ostracized by this very community that he grew up in and was forced to roam the earth with his free-loving uncle. He started to open up his eyes and learn that maybe, just maybe, the Fire Nation, his home, and the people that he grew up with were actually the bad guys all along, and he switched sides to the Avatar. And that example is probably one of the strongest examples of character development I have ever seen, and that is in a children's television show. It breaks my heart that that kind of time and care is not invested into books that are marketed towards women. Instead, the reader is encouraged to dismiss or excuse or just overlook the fascist love interest instead of trying to develop the character and putting in the work to actually make the character change. The onus is put on the reader to dismiss, excuse, and even overlook these heinous acts of genocide that these characters perform. We'll get into this a little bit more down the line. Alright, and without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to provide you guys some background on Silver Elite in order to give you some context about the nature of the story and the motivation that Dani Francis, if that really is his or her real name, why she wanted to write this book in the first place. And her response to the question, what possessed you or inspired you to write this story, her superficial answer I think really speaks to the level of quality that we will see resonate throughout the rest of her story. So Dani Francis said in an interview that the reason why she wrote Silver Elite, which is unfortunately going to be a series, Happy Days, she said that she wanted to write a Hunger Games book with spice in it because she was very upset that books like The Hunger Games, which are YA novels by the way, did not have smut or sex scenes in it. Now I understand that she meant that she wanted to make an adult version of Hunger Games. I'm not saying that she was advocating for putting in sex scenes into books like this that are marketed towards young adults and teens, but what I'm trying to say here that I think that this response really speaks volumes to how much time and effort not only does she pour into the story itself, but also the world building and the character development, because the entire time I was reading this, I was just picturing the Divergent series as a backdrop. And to be quite frank with you, I would not have been shocked at all if at one point in the very beginning of the book, Dani Francis just wrote, hey, just copy and paste the world of Divergent and apply it to this story. A lot of the onus of the world building is put on the reader, and I found that to be incredibly frustrating because this book is essentially an amalgamation of all of the YA dystopian books combined. Think Divergent, think Hunger Games, think Maze Runner, think Matched, think Uglies. Nothing in this story is anything that we haven't seen before. Even Divergent does a better job of that because it tells us which city it takes place in, so that way we can picture it as readers and then have a better understanding of where we are. As opposed to this story, I just couldn't figure out where these people were. So Silver Elite is what I would like to call a dystopian urban fantasy, where we live in a world that has been rocked by biological warfare and has also seen the rise and fall of two empires within one lifetime. And our protagonist, Ren Darlington, lives in a world in which being Silverblood or modified is illegal. There is a war between the normal people or the primaries versus the Silverbloods or the modifies. They also call them the Amaranth, but I'm going to call them mod or modified just to give you guys a little heads up. So in this world, you can identify Silverbloods by a blood mark that could be various parts of their body, or you can also identify them by their glowing silver veins that pop up whenever they miraculously use their telepathic abilities. Silverbloods, for the most part, have telepathic abilities. These people have the ability to read each other's minds, discuss or talk through these mental group chats, incite or manipulate people to do things against their own bidding, and even rewiring someone's brain so they go crazy. And this final and fourth version, they can also project images into other people's minds and for some reason also heal them. I'm not entirely sure how the healing factor connects to the telepathic factor, but whatever. This is treated as more of a plot device or convenience to the story because whenever a character of substance or importance to the narrative gets injured, then they are immediately healed. So instead of the Silverbloods being a position of power, it's actually the normals or the primaries that are the ruling class. There are also these rich people or capitalists that the general and the other primaries suck up to in order to maintain their funding, but they don't really play a huge part in the story other than to just inform us that this entire world is still run by capitalism, unfortunately. And there are some Silverbloods that have actually turned on their own kind and are what are seen as loyalists. And these loyalists are the Silverbloods that have the black band around their left hand, and they actually serve the general and do his bidding. We're going to see a character called Jade Valance, not to be confused with JD Vance throughout this story. And Jade Valance is a right-hand woman to the general, and she goes out and she does his bidding. She reads people's minds. She tries to find other Silverbloods just like her, and she's another antagonist in the story that we're going to see pop up periodically, so just keep your eyes open for that. So like I mentioned before, our protagonist Ren Darlington is a Silverblood, and she lives on a ranch with her uncle Jim. Now her uncle Jim is not really her uncle. He's actually a man called Julian Ash, and when she was 5, her parents were killed and he took her, little Ren Darlington, into the Badlands. So when I talk about the Badlands, I want you to picture the dark forest from Snow White because it has a very similar vibe to that. There are dark creatures in the forest like the white coyote or the horned bear. There are also tar pits that act as quicksand, and it's also very dark inside to the point where light cannot even permeate the darkness. Ren and her uncle lived in the Badlands for 3 years before exiting onto the other side and deciding to live in normal society. And ever since, they have been working on this ranch, and Ren has been learning how to shoot a rifle, and she is a very good shot, which will be illustrated later on. Ren and her uncle are trying to lay low and just fly under the radar, that way they don't bring any attention to themselves, because if anyone were to find out who they really are, then they would surely imprison them or kill them by firing squad. Now Uncle Jim, he had to get rid of her blood marks so that way no one knew who she was, and so he dumped a bunch of boiling hot water onto her leg, and thus her blood mark is hidden underneath and she is able to pass as a normal person or primary. Now Ren is not like other Silverbloods, of course. God forbid any of the protagonists in these stories are just a normal human being. Ren is actually the specialist special girl that ever specialed, because not only is she a Silverblood and has amazing abilities, abilities and can shoot really well. She also doesn't glow when she uses those powers. So usually when you're a silver blood, the veins on your arms glow when you're using your telepathic abilities, but in her case, when she is reaching out psychically, having a psychic conversation with someone, or is trying to incite on others, no one can actually tell that she is a modified because her arms don't glow at all. And the implications of the evolutionary cycle finally catching up with the modified in order to have a better protection system for them, that kind of topic is never really brought up again. We're never really meant to question why Ren is the only one who has this insane ability to mask or hide her silver blood veins. We're just expected to just dismiss it and move on with our lives. So what we know about Ren is that she's basically treated as this miracle, but we never really delve into the evolutionary insinuations behind this. Does this mean that the modifies are going to get to a place where no one can detect them? Are we going to get to a place where the primaries now have to go out and search for these special modified? Those questions are never really answered. And it would actually bring some real complexity into the story, because in a book like Red Queen, there are a lot of hidden implications behind Mayor Barrow's existence. The fact that the Red Bloods are suddenly able to have these superpowers is quite startling. Also, the fact that Mayor Barrow now has superpowers as a Red Blood is perceived as a threat to the kingdom, because this means that there are other Red Bloods out there who could potentially rise up, form a coup, and attack the king and take over his empire. So that level of importance when it comes to Ren and her abilities is not really elevated to where I think it should be. It's more or less treated as a plot device and another example as to why Ren is super special, not like other girls, not like other silver bloods, and why she is the main character of our story. I would like to say there is nothing wrong with giving your characters special abilities. It just gets to a point where you're giving them too much, where your characters become overpowered and the plot armor is so thick that there's really no tension around them and their mortality. The reader never really gets to question whether or not our main character will survive or what might happen to people around them, because no matter what, they're going to find a way out of it. And that is yet another pet peeve of mine from this story, is that we are making these characters way too powerful and there really is no tension or conflict, because we know they're going to get out of these situations completely unscathed and we're never really meant to worry for their mortality. Unlike Game of Thrones, Dani Francis is not at all motivated to kill her darlings. She is completely content with keeping these insufferable characters around for hundreds and hundreds of pages without actually doing anything, and we as a reader unfortunately are the ones who are meant to suffer the most. So Ren and her uncle have to lay low and fly under the radar because of the company, the army that works for the general. So the general who's now ruling over them all was actually once a low-ranking primary, but he banded together a bunch of his fellow primaries, formed a coup, took over the kingdom, and killed the Silver Blood King. Now the reason why the general and his army rose up to form the company and take over the Silver Bloods was actually because the Silver Bloods were treating them like slaves, which is something that we never really touch on later on in the story. We have these two sides who are reciprocating blow for blow. They are retaliating against each other. They are adopting these philosophies of an eye for an eye rather than trying to come to a compromise or try to find a peaceful solution to their problems. The company and the rebellion, or the network, are basically two sides of the same coin, and I really wish that Dani Francis would have explored this topic a little bit more, because Ren really grapples with this issue. She sees how both sides treat their own soldiers as disposable. There is a lot of nuance to that when it comes to war, but she never really comes to that conclusion by the end. Instead, she seems to be way more sympathetic towards one side over the other, and we'll get to that soon enough. So Ren also has a best friend named Tana, who is one of the only people of color in the story. She is a young silver blood like Ren who works in an inn with her father, and they are also spies for the network. Ren does kind of work for the network, but she does small little tasks for them, much to her uncle's chagrin. Jim does not want her getting involved with the network because he's scared that she may accidentally reveal herself, draw attention to them, and get them both killed, which is a very understandable fear, but Ren decides to work for them anyway. And the first time we meet Ren, she is actually waking up after a night out with a soldier, a primary soldier named Jordan, a man who would surely kill her if he ever found out her true identity. And this is the part that confuses me the most, because Ren mentioned that she works for the network and she is willingly and openly sleeping with these soldiers who are committing acts of genocide against her own people. She has a fascist fetish and is honestly quite startling to me that a woman like this would even be attracted enough to a man like this to not only talk to him, but to also go home with him and spend a night with. This woman has absolutely no self-preservation skills, and the worst part of this is that she's not even doing this as reconnaissance mission for the network. She would be way more useful to the rebellion if she was using this tactic to rope these men in, seduce them. Maybe she puts something in their drink so they pass out a little bit quicker. She rifles through their things, gets some intel, and then reports back to the network or the leader, Adrian. That would have made so much more sense, and I honestly would have applauded Dani Francis if she used that as a tool to prove how useful she is to the network. But no, Ren is somehow attracted to these Nazi soldiers who are killing her own people. Not exactly sure how she could possibly stomach even being in the same room as this man, let alone allowing him to visit her secret magical garden. I'm sorry, but what could this woman possibly get out of sleeping with these men? They don't seem to be very generous lovers, so you know that she's not enjoying herself. I'm not critiquing the fact that Ren is sleeping with a man, but I'm critiquing the kind of man that she is associating with without any repercussions to this interaction. If I were Tana and I knew that my friend was literally sleeping with the enemy and actually enjoying it, I would seriously consider even being near that woman. Guilty by association. If she's perfectly fine with interacting and associating with men like this and ignoring the atrocities that they commit against our people, what else is she perfectly capable of sidestepping or ignoring? I would also be concerned for her health because she's literally putting herself in danger. And she's not even getting anything out of it because it's so clear that she does not like this man, because the minute that this man begins to stir in his sleep and wake up, she books it out of there and crashes into this other room to hide, only to find another man there. Now when Ren enters this man's room, he thinks that she's trying to assassinate him because she's carrying her rifle, because in this book apparently we are very pro-gun and Ren is an excellent shot. And as she's entering his room, this man, who we later learn is her future love interest, huge shocker, he tries to wrestle the gun out of her hand, and once they're getting close and it's getting a little hot and heavy, he insinuates that if she broke into his room a few moments earlier, then she probably could have joined in with his little tryst that he had going on. And this scene in particular really disgusted me because it is very clear that this man has a severe corn addiction. Outside of a corn film, when have you ever heard of this actually happening in the man's favor? This was also a moment where I began to think that maybe this book was written by AI, because in the normal world this wouldn't usually happen. If a woman or someone would walk into a room and see two people getting it on, they would most likely leave out of embarrassment and probably not come back. Ren is a little bit taken aback by his arrogance because he's assuming that he is just so attractive and seductive that he could get any woman to sleep with him, including other women. Which again, no shade, if you're into threesomes, that's great, good for you. I'm just saying in this context, we never really got to see whether or not Ren was gender fluid. I do want to say that if the roles were flipped and the tables were turned and Cross was the one who walked in on Jordan and Ren getting it on, I seriously doubt that he would want to join in as well. Double standards. I have to say another huge disappointment for me would be the lack of bi representation in books like this, especially books that are marketed as smutty. They're usually very homogenous and very heteronormative, and they lack basic creativity. A lot of these scenes are essentially the same and they are based around straight couples. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I think that over time a lot of these scenes just really blend together, and that's why I just tend to skip them because they really don't offer anything new. Now if we had a devil's threesome in this book, I would change my tune. So Ren leaves the room in disgust even though she was trying to run away from Jordan, and the minute she goes back out into the hallway, Jordan is there looking for her, calling her name, and when he sees her, he asks her if she's doing anything that weekend, to which Ren is shocked that this man would even want to spend another day with her. Again, which once again proves my point that Jordan was having way more fun than Ren and was not doing the necessary things in order to make sure that his partner was having as much of a good time as he was. Another point of this interaction that kind of shocked me was the fact that Ren seemed to be very oblivious to how casual dating works. Once you find a willing partner, it is much easier to keep the ball rolling and continue to hang out with that person, because the other alternative is that you have to do the this whole cycle all over again. This is another reason why I think this book could have also been written by AI, because it doesn't understand basic human dating culture rituals. This scene would have made way more sense if Ren was hiding intel and she was trying to get back to her rebel base in order to inform Adrian, rather than sticking around with this soldier and just trying to politely turn him down, because he wasn't a very good bedfellow in more ways than one. So Ren finally is able to slither out of Jordan's grasp and go downstairs and hop on her motorbike and head on home to the ranch. And during this time, she's basically on a psychic phone call with Tana, and she tells Tana that she is riding on her motorbike and she shouldn't telepath and drive, which I think was the author's attempt at a joke, but it also doesn't really make that much sense, because how much are you really concentrating on this casual conversation between you and your friend that you cannot control the motorbike? AI robots have no idea how talking works. After reading books like this with rumors that it was written by AI, I don't think we have anything to worry about the quality of AI. So after Ren hangs up on Tana, she gets another psychic phone call from Wolf. Wolf is a cryptic pen pal that she's had since she was 6 years old. One day she got this friend request in her head and she answered it, and it turned out to be Wolf. Now to Wolf, she is Daisy, and they've maintained this cute little interaction since they were kids. When they were kids, it was more about feeding into their loneliness and just maintaining a friendship. And now that they are older, it now has become borderline flirtatious, where both of them are bantering with each other and talking about their love lives. Now, during this interaction, I do also want to mention that Wolf is talking about the ocean. He's talking about seeing these boats, and very specific boats with a very specific name that will come into play later, which I think was actually a nice little plot device. I don't see a lot of foreshadowing in books like these nowadays, so I did appreciate seeing that literary device used here somewhat properly. It was still very predictable who Wolf really was, because Ren's love life is already pretty crowded, and adding another man into the mix would make it downright cumbersome. Even though Wolf is a potential love interest for Ren, he calls her a witch with a B, which is one of my biggest pet peeves. When men in books call women witches with a B, first of all, it's very disrespectful, it's very rude, and there's usually a lot of loaded context behind that word, and I personally just wish that Dani Francis just didn't include the word at all, or just chose another way for Wolf to poke fun at Daisy/Ren. Then Ren, after she hangs up with Wolf, begins to monologue about the world. This is very similar to the scene in Fourth Wing in which Violet is tightrope walking across a parapet to get to the other side, and she monologues about the history of the continent. This also is a conspiracy theory of mine, and I'm going to be putting my conspiracy theory hat on here, but I think this book could possibly have also been written by Rebecca Yarros. There are a lot of very similar beats within this book to Fourth Wing, because in the very beginning of the story we have a lot of exposition dumping. We don't really delve into the world in its entirety, and even when we do, it feels very half-baked. Even though in this book she ends up with the best of both worlds, because not only does she end up with her version of Dane, but she also ends up with Xaden. She gets to have her cake and eat it too, because these two men turn out to be the same person. But we will see if my predictions are correct, because this author has been very reticent to come out with her true identity. I think it's creating an even bigger controversy for this book, and that's why there's a lot more marketing around it, because there is that added mystery of who is Dani Francis. I think that's really tapping into why more people are interested in reading the book. It's not because of the book itself, it's because they're trying to decipher who this author could be. So I think this is a very effective marketing strategy, and I really think that if we knew who Dani Francis was, this book would not be half as successful as it is right now. Authors have used pen names or pseudonyms in the past, like Dr. Seuss for example, and no one really seems to care. However, in this case, I think it has garnered a lot more controversy and buzz around the story, which is why it's so popular nowadays. So I guess word to the wise, if you're thinking about writing a book, write it with a pen name then. And you might get more buzz, or you just might get more critique around it. I'm not entirely sure how that will work, but from what I can see, it has worked out for Silver Elite, so who knows, it might work out for you as well. I do also want to mention that Ren does talk about the technology a little bit in this story. They have iPads and fingerprint scanners and motorbikes and guns, which does make sense because there is this prestigious war college that a lot of people go to, and they do actually practice shooting guns. So I thought that was very appropriate. However, I just feel like we get into an uncomfortable pro-gun kind of conversation throughout the rest of this book. It does seem like the author is a bit of a fence sitter when it comes to a lot of the morals and politics of this story, because we will see her flip-flop back and forth between these two sides, talking about whether or not the company or the network are good or bad. So on her way home to her ranch, Ren decides to stop by the market to get some supplies, and while she is there, a young boy is attacked by a white coyote, a animal hybrid that's very monstrous in size. As this young boy is being dragged away, Ren decides to step up and be a hero, and she aims her rifle at the coyote and shoots it right through the eye without harming the young boy at all, even though the wolf was 100 yards away. This was an incredible shot. Unfortunately, it does draw attention to herself. It was the one thing she was instructed not to do. And now that she has eyes on her, everyone in the marketplace saw the shot. A lot of people in the company, who are the bad guys by the way, heard about the shot, and now Ren is now under the proverbial microscope, and she has drawn attention to not only herself but also to her uncle, who is actually a deserter to the company. And once the company hears about this, they go to their ranch and they arrest her uncle. Tana is one of the first who finds out what's going on, and she alerts Ren that they are going to her house, and she tries to contact her uncle Jim, who tells her to stay away. And when she gets to her ranch, she finds that he is gone and he has been imprisoned. Now she tries to communicate with Tana and the head of the network named Adrian, and she is begging them to release her uncle, but the problem is that now that they know who Julian Ash is, he is way too noticeable, and he would draw even more attention to the network if they managed to break him out of prison. So unfortunately, he's going to have to be a unwitting sacrifice to the rebellion. Ren is understandably heartbroken at this revelation, and instead of laying low and going to a safe house that the rebellion had provided for her, she decides to go and witness her uncle's death. Uncle Jim is about to be executed by firing squad, and there are 8 men lined up with their guns ready to fire. Now during this time, Ren is starting to learn something new about herself. She learns that she has the ability to incite or manipulate people to do things to her bidding. After she has one final psychic phone call with her uncle, Ren turns to the 8-man firing squad and starts to tell them what to do. She commands them to drop their guns. They drop their guns. They are not the ones that are controlling their actions anymore. Someone else is. And as they're dropping their guns, she's telling them to turn the guns on themselves. Everyone in the square is freaking out because they have no idea what's going on or why these men are acting this way. Now when Ren tells them to pull the triggers, for some reason they turn the guns back on her uncle and open fire. So Ren has indirectly killed her uncle, even though it's going to happen anyway. Personally, I think she should have just told these men to drop their guns and walk away, but I did not write this book, so this is just how the scene played out. Now as Ren is trying to run away from the square, she is grabbed from behind by the soldier and is arrested. This woman is a magnet for trouble, and she absolutely refuses to follow orders that could potentially save her life. Now as she's in prison awaiting her trial, Ren reaches out to Tana and begs her to try to get her out of there. Tana says, "Sorry, you dug yourself into this hole. I'll try to get you out, but there really is not much that I can do," because now Tana and her father are also being spied on. The primaries have basically taken up posts at the inn, and now there are even more eyes on them than there were before. And Tana is afraid not only for her life but also for her father's life. She can't really risk being found out that she's a Silverblood, so she has to cut ties temporarily with Ren, at least until they can figure out a notable solution to get her out of there. Now Ren goes to her trial, and in the council that will deliberate her fate, there is Jordan, the man that she slept with the night before, as well as Cross, the man who was next door and that she ran into while she was fleeing from Jordan. And Cross introduces himself as the son of the general, so basically he's like the prince of the kingdom. I'm not exactly sure how the politics play out there because the ruler is still called the general. I don't know why they don't just change it to something like emperor or monführer. They chose to call him just the general, but that's his title now, and I guess we just have to roll with it. So Cross says that she has 2 choices. She can either go work in the labor camps or the salt mines, or she can go to the police academy, which is basically where they groom young adults into becoming the next Gestapo. Ren understandably does not like her options. She wants to go back to her ranch, but according to Cross, they basically seized the ranch and gave it to their primary friends. Ren is now homeless, fatherless, guardianless, motherless, and friendless because Tana has basically shut her out and she has no other options, nowhere to go. And unfortunately, the only option she does have includes genocide or working for the enemy and strengthening their army. So because Cross is in charge, he basically strong arms her into going into the academy, where she will be under his watchful eye in what's called Silver Block. So as she is taken to this military academy, she is trying time and time again to reason with Tana and Adrian to get her out of that position. Now, a smarter person could probably have offered to provide intel from the military academy where they keep their military secrets. But again, because Ren is one of the most unintelligent FMCs I've ever witnessed in my entire life and has no survival skills or street smarts whatsoever, she just decides to succumb to her fate and also fail out of the academy. Now, this is a terrible plan for multiple reasons, because one, Cross already knows that she is a good soldier, at least a good shooter. Failing on purpose would draw even more unwarranted attention to herself and probably put her under investigation, which is something that she does not want. And two, she has nowhere to go if she fails out of the academy. She can't just walk back to the ranch and demand it back. There are primaries living there, and it would most likely report back to Cross, who would probably put her back in the labor camp. And three, it's not like Cross would ever let her go. It's very obvious that he wants to keep her there under supervision because he does not truly believe that she did not know about her uncle. Because during the trial, they were talking about how her uncle was a Silverblood, and Ren, who has to pretend like she is a primary, acts like she is confused, like she never knew that her uncle was a Silverblood, so she's feigning innocence so she can avoid her own firing squad without doing it properly. Because Cross sees through her subterfuge and her facade, and he knows that she is lying, so he decides to keep her under his watchful eye. So upon arrival, Ren immediately befriends one girl named Liddy. Now Liddy is much more of a meek little wallflower. She's a very intelligent young woman, but she's not very good at combat skills or shooting. She's very book smart. She expresses her desires to Ren that she wants to be in the intelligence branch of the army rather than being in the combat army itself. And Ren and her strike up this friendship because she finds a kindred spirit in Liddy, and they decide to become allies. Now, on their first night there at the academy, Ren realizes that there are not enough beds in the barracks where they're living, and she gives Liddy her bed, and instead of sleeping on the floor or asking for a bed, she decides to share a bed with my personal favorite character, Kane. Now, Kane is very spunky, very lively, genuinely a decent guy, and it really was a bummer to me because he just knew that he never had a chance with her. I really wish that these books for once would let us enjoy and see a kind, respectful man finally get the girl. Instead, we are stuck with these moody, broody bad boys whose only merit is the fact that they are attractive and decent in bed. Unfortunately, in books like this, nice guys always finish last, but at least they do finish. That night, Ren once again tries to reach out to Adrian, who tells her that she is not enough of an asset for the network to risk their lives to try to save. And instead of offering them intel, Ren just decides to hang up on Adrian and her best friend Tana. But then she reaches out to Wolf, who does offer her some solace. They have this very nice heart-to-heart conversation, which made me just wish that he was actually Kane instead of who he really is. So the next day is their first day of training, and Ren really starts off strong by literally doing everything in her power to sabotage herself. Instead of just flying under the radar, she just decides to be the worst one in the class. And Liddy, who is a kind little fascist, decides to help her out. We also meet other characters in the story. Also, one nice person outside of Kane and Liddy is Fatima, who is another one of the very sparse members of color in this story. On the other side, we have Ro, Cross's younger half-brother, who cares way more about snorting up stem into his nose than actually getting through the academy. He is a rambunctious, bombastic nepo baby who basically skirts along on the coattails of his father's success and doesn't really expect to actually have to prove himself to anyone. He thinks he already has a golden ticket. He does nothing substantial to actually try to better himself and make a name for himself. Why do that when he is already identified as a general's son? He is his bastard son though. He's a very selfish, arrogant young man, and there's also Anson, this creepy, manipulative man who more than once tries to force himself on Ren, and nothing is done about his shady behavior, not even by Cross, the man who has this burgeoning attraction to Ren, who is infatuated with her, and as he's watching this man treat her like this, he does absolutely nothing other than to step in and act as a white knight or hero to make himself look better instead of actually doing anything to solve the problem. Kick this guy out. He's a liability to your entire army if he's willing to hurt women. If he's intentionally, with malice aforethought, hurting other people in your army, you need to get rid of him. Do something other than this performative, antiquated, patriarchal that all men feel the need to perform, so that way the woman that was being assaulted would be even more motivated to sleep with them. When Cross does rescue Ren from Anson, he is glorified as a sympathetic hero, when in reality he doesn't do anything of note to actually fix the problem. He is part of the problem. He is still a fascist, and yet we are meant to see him as as one of the good ones instead of the monster that he really is. And I think that is one of the biggest weaknesses of this entire story. We lose focus as to who the real victims are. We are told as the reader to overlook all of the disgusting, heinous atrocities that Cross has committed because he is her potential love interest. So as Ren is suffering through this academy, she's talking to Adrian, and Adrian is saying, we have some moles on the inside. So now Ren asks her about the hotshot pilot. Now the rebellion has this amazing fighter pilot who has done amazing feats. He has a huge reputation and he is seen as her saving grace. She asks Adrian if she can get the pilot to come by and rescue her, but Adrian once again says that she is just not worth all the trouble. This is when we as a reader too are meant to realize that, oh, the network isn't really very nice either. They're just as cruel and heartless as the company, which is arguable to say the least. But I do see what Dani Francis was attempting to do here in trying to rationalize how both sides are really just as evil as the other one. Unfortunately, she is more of a pawn in the game, but then Adrian tells her that the pilot is predisposed, and there are hints throughout the rest of the story that maybe the pilot just isn't there anymore, something happened, or maybe he's not as good as he once was because all the other network attacks that have involved fighter pilot jets, he hasn't been as accurate in his shots. So there is this elusive mystery around the pilot as well as Wolf. There are a lot of mysterious men out there, a lot of puzzles that we are forced to solve, and this was the only part of the book that was actually interesting to me, was the mystery surrounding Wolf and the pilot, because we were hinted at their true identities. There was a lot of payoff surrounding their identities because they were very significant characters. So hats off to Dani Francis for actually developing a decent mystery surrounding these characters. Unfortunately, that was very short-lived. We're gonna put a pin in the summary for just a minute. This book is really boring. This book had a lot going on, and yet nothing was really going on. It was very paradoxical in that way, because even though there are a lot of scenes where things are happening, they're not really moving the story along that well. And even then, it's all tropes and scenes and ideas that we've seen before. While I was reading through the Academy portion, I was thinking to myself, this is the third book I've read exactly like this. Not word for word per se. I'm not exactly calling Dani Francis a plagiarizer. I'm just saying that this book and Fourth Wing and Divergent are so painfully similar to the point where I can't really engage with the text. And I think that's one of the biggest downfalls of the publishing industry, is that they're publishing so many of the same books without trying to subvert the very tropes that they are marketing with that book. I would love to see someone do something creative with stories like this, but I just feel like they really fall flat because, again, it's just regurgitated material from other books that everyone has already read before. There's nothing new, there's nothing special, there's nothing intriguing, it's just a slog. So after learning about this vital component of the Resistance, Ren is contemplating who this mystery pilot is and how to get out of the Academy. And like Divergent, they also have these hand-to-hand combat scenes because, of course, it is a staple of dystopian fan fiction apparently. And during these hand-to-hand combat scenes, Ren develops a personal rival in another character named Kes. So Kes does not like Ren for whatever reason and just decides to try to take out her anger on her. Now their first fight, Ren actually wins, and they use this moment to taunt each other throughout the rest of the story. It's just annoying, this pestering between these two female characters. But even though she won the first fight with Kes, Ren is still determined to try to find any way possible to get out of the Academy, even by injuring herself. So during one of her fights with Kes, she purposefully breaks her wrist and is sent to the infirmary. Now for some reason, there are some Silverbloods who are also healers. I don't know how that is connected to being a telepath or a psychic, because that requires very different level of skills, but these healers are essentially used as a plot convenience to get Ren back into the ring and also for Cross to hold one over on her. It makes sense that you would want a healer at a military academy because people get hurt and shot all the time, so you want to make sure you have a good healer on hand. I'm just not sure how that relates to psychic abilities at all, but whatever, we're just ignoring it. So Ellis is the royal healer for the general, and he is also there at the military academy to help people with their wounds. One day before they get into the more immersive, difficult part of their training, all of the cadets, so to speak, are lined up and they're basically healed. So their entire bodies are healed better than new, better than they have ever been their entire life. And then when Ellis gets to Ren, he's about to heal her burn scar, which covers her blood mark. Now we're not exactly sure if the blood mark is still there underneath all the scar tissue, but Ren prevents him from doing that because she has has nostalgic ties to the scar, and she wants it to remind her of where she came from. This is also a big inconsistency with her scar too, because she sometimes complains that it hurts her, but then other times she says it doesn't hurt her, it just feels like a slight tug or a pull. So that's another plot hole that I see with her scar, is that the author doesn't even seem to grasp how it truly affects her pain-wise, and we just get these random snippets where she complains about her scar hurting, but then other times when she's doing other strenuous tasks, it's totally fine, doesn't affect her at all. This scar seems to have a mind of its own, and it's not entirely sure when it wants to hurt Ren, versus when it doesn't. Ren develops a lot of enemies, not just in Kes, but also with Ro and Anson, and these two men become way more volatile as the book progresses. Now, on their off time, there is some levity provided to their training, and the new recruits and their commanders go to this place of entertainment called the Pit. Now, in the Pit, it's basically like this boxing ring, and people can enter and challenge each other and basically beat the shit out of each other, all for fun. Not entertained! This is where we also see Cross's prowess when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. Now, he and his best friend Xavier Ford are in the ring, and it's very clear that Cross is beating him, and he's beating him ruthlessly. And Kane, who is standing right next to Ren, who for some reason is very much turned on by the fact that Cross is willing to push loyalty aside and harm his best friend, he tells her that, oh yeah, be careful with Cross because he will turn on you like that, and he will even turn on his best friend. Basically telling her that he's a bit of a sadist. Not only that, but Cross will do anything necessary to end up on top. It makes sense of survival that you literally have to do whatever it takes, but it also calls to question how loyal these people are to each other. This entire military is based on this very individualistic drive for ambition, to come out on top in any means necessary, even if it means hurting your friends along the way. And this is also illustrated in another scene or test. And during this test, these new recruits have to find a way to navigate through this burning building, all the while pulling their partner out to safety. This test is actually one with double meaning. The only people who win the test are the ones who abandon their partners to die in the fire while they escape on their own. So this military academy is not motivated to create heroes. They're just motivated to create soldiers who will do whatever is necessary to get out on the other side on their own, even if it means abandoning their good friends in their wake. Even though they're not instructed or even encouraged to outright kill each other like in Fourth Wing, this military academy also doesn't preach the camaraderie that I believe is necessary to have a successful military. What's the point of fighting alongside your brothers and sisters in arms if you're not willing to sacrifice or help them when the going gets tough? Even though this military academy is not as murderous as Fourth Wing's academy is, it still is not a very good one. These people have absolutely no value for human life, and it shows. Meanwhile, Jordan, the man who is on the council and was the one that we met in the very beginning of the book, throughout these scenes basically pretends like he doesn't really know her. And Ren is more or less offended by this because it just shows how much of a coward she is. She's also very disappointed in herself for picking him, not because he's a fascist who murders her own people, but because he is a spineless coward. Girl, you really need to sort out your priorities. So after witnessing Cross's display of masculinity, her and Fatima go out on the roof to get some air and for Ren to cool herself down. Now while they're out there, they are approached by Ro and Anson. At this point, we already know that Anson is a creep, but this is when we are shown Ro's true colors. Underneath the drug addiction and the nepotism and the arrogance, there is a cruel, conniving sadist just lying in wait, ready to pounce. And this is when he reveals that he knows that one of them is a Silverblood, and Ren starts to freak out. But then he turns to Fatima and accuses her of being a Silverblood. Without due process, without any trial, he takes out his gun and kills her. And Ren is incredibly saddened by this because this woman was one of her good friends and she just witnessed her murdered. And when she tries to go to contest this and defend Fatima, it's basically her word against Ro's, and everyone believes Ro. And when she says, oh, I never saw anything, people are like, are you accusing him of lying? But then she turns the tables on them and she says, well, what kind of people are we gonna be if we're just open firing on people and accusing random people of being a Silverblood when there is no true evidence of that? Because no one else in the entire academy knew or even suspected Fatima of being a Silverblood. Now, the way that they could have proven that she was a Silverblood was through Jade Valance. So I forgot to mention this during Ren's trial, trial, but during Ren's trial, Jade Valance comes in and she is the loyalist to the general, is one of the most powerful ones. So during this time, Ren is putting up a shield to try to block out all the necessary information about her true identity as Jade Valance is rifling through her thoughts, and in order to distract her, she starts to give her little bits and pieces, kind of surface level secrets. Oh my gosh, I can't believe my uncle died. I can't believe I'm never gonna see my friend Tana again. Basic stuff like that to distract Jade from the fact that she is actually shielding her. And so Jade, after spending a few minutes of rifling through her thoughts, came to the conclusion, okay, yes, she's not a Silverblood, she can go to the academy. And instead of doing this with Fatima, Ro just decides to take the law into his hands, become judge, jury, and executioner, and just outright shooting her. As she's defending her friend to her other friends, she's soon realizing that these people are little tiny fascists who were indoctrinated since they were children on this imperialistic dogma. It's an us versus them mentality. The Silverbloods, they grew up understanding how their own people were enslaved by the Silverbloods, and so now they decided that they have the Silverbloods. They have this history where the Silverbloods had enslaved and tortured and harmed them, and so they retaliated and essentially did the same to the Silverbloods. And so it's just this pendulum swinging of back and forth of war and genocide, torture and imprisonment, and there really seems to be no end in sight. Forget peace, they just are so insistent on fighting each other in this vindictive vendetta of an eye for an eye. There is no motivation to peace, only just squelching the other side for good. And this level of vitriolic prejudice towards her own kind rises to the surface even in the places where she did not suspect it, like Liddy. This is a huge disappointment for Ren because she thought that Liddy was a good person, but it's proven that Liddy is only as nice as she is allowed to be when it's convenient for her and her beliefs or her faith. Right? Because she believes since she was very young that Silverbloods were evil people, so then they have to be stamped out. And she is not willing to even consider the fact that Fatima may not have been Silverblood, because the other truth behind that would be that Ro is just killing people that he doesn't like freely. And that's an even harder reality for her to contend with. She just decides to go with the flow, stick to the status quo, and just pretend like Fatima was actually Silverblood. But later on that night, we find out that actually Ro was right. Personally, I would think it would have packed an even harder punch if we realized that Fatima was actually not Silverblood, but Adrian does confirm that not only was Fatima Silverblood, she was also a mole on the inside. And now they have a space open for Ren. Ren is enthusiastic at this news, and she's like, perfect, great, what do you need me to do? And then Adrian tells her, we need you to get into Silver Elite. And Ren is like, crap. I've been trying my hardest to fail out of the system, and now I have to switch sides and actually try to get to the Silver Elite. So you have Silver Block and then you have Silver Elite. So that's the top of the hierarchy. That's the creme de la creme of the military academy. Everyone wants to get in, but not everyone will. So Ren is now panicking because she doesn't know how she's going to play it off. She's also worried about how she's going to convince other people that she had a change of heart. And it turns out she was right. So the next day, as they are at the shooting range, she hits every single target perfectly, a little too perfectly. But then, even though she should have gotten like an A+ on the rating scale, she's still getting her average C's and D's. Incensed by this injustice, she goes to Cross, who is in charge of the scorekeeping, and demands to know why he gave her such low scores. And he tells her that he suspected all along that she was just trying to fail out of the academy, but now he's reticent to actually give her the good scores. But after a conversation full of sexual tension, she finally convinces him that she really did have a change of heart and she actually wants to do well at the academy. So then he starts to give her the scores that she really does deserve. The only person who seems to be as negatively affected about Fatima's death is actually Cross. So Cross is very bothered by the fact that Ro just fired randomly on one of his cadets without the due process, because in his mind he thinks that Fatima is still innocent. He prevents Ro from progressing in the academy, which makes his older brother named Travis very upset, and Ro is understandably very upset as well. But Ren is pleased because it once again proves that Cross is one of the good ones and actually has a decent head on his shoulders, despite the fact that he has put hundreds of her own people into labor camps. There is another very tenuous trial, and what happens is that these cadets are placed into rooms for 5 days and basically tortured. So during these 5 days, Ren is in the room with Ro and Ivy. Now Ivy is Cross's little side piece. And they're not really dating officially anymore. So one night Ren did actually walk in on them doing the dirty deed. Cross once again invited her in for a threesome. She rejected his proposal and then she left. And Ren is not quite comfortable being in the same room as these people because one, Ro is the man who killed her friend, and Ivy is sleeping with the man she's attracted to. So now she's stuck in this room in a very awkward situation with a bucket in the corner, and it is awful. What they're doing is testing how good of a prisoner of war they're going to be. So if they ever get captured by the Silverbloods and are tortured for information, are they going to be able to hold out? Now in this room, they have no food, really no water, and they are deprived of sleep because periodically there are these sprinklers that will spray down water on them to wake them up. Then when they're not in that room, they're being dragged out into this chair, tied up, slapped around, and questioned for intel that they do not have. And then they go back into the room when they are done. Of course, this is a very difficult feat, and Ivy almost cracks because she already did this before and she is really suffering through it. It seems to be an eternity that they're in this room together, and Ren is really trying to encourage her to go through it. Even Ro, we see a more vulnerable side to him where he is starting to crack under the pressure as well. He starts to talk about his childhood and how he was just seen as a bastard son. His father basically ignored his mother and he is never allowed to see the queen. Now she comes into play later, so keep her in the back of your mind. But of course, all three of them pass, make it through to the next round. So the following day, the new scores come out and Ren has miraculously passed by the skin of her teeth and all of her friends as well. Ro has not passed and he's very upset. So that night when they go to the pit, a very high and very angry Ro challenges Cross. Cross goes down there and is hesitant to go up against his brother, but he has no other choice, and he teaches Ro a lesson with his fists. At the end of the fight, Ro, with his tail between his legs, runs away, not to be seen until the very end of the story. I do also want to mention, you guys, that Cross does have tattoos, because of course. So now that Ren has made it to the next level, there are only 12 people who are slotted to make it into the elite, and she notes how this is actually quite a big number because usually the elite are very difficult to get into. But then there is a plot twist. There is yet another test they have to pass, and this next test is a feat of strength and prowess in hand-to-hand combat. So they are put into this room with this window for other people to watch, and they basically have to fight this person either until they concede, give up, or to the death. And the person that she is paired up with is Felicity. Now Felicity is a very nice girl, one of the good ones, and Ren does not take any pleasure in hurting her. But unfortunately, it's her or Felicity, and she has to make it through to the other side in order to be an asset to the network and to escape. So she has to beat Felicity, and during this time she is actually winning, and she is telling Felicity, tap out, you need to tap out, because Felicity's father, who is one of the captains of the army, is watching them. But Felicity is so overcome with mortification, and she tells Ren to kill her because she'd much rather die than face the embarrassment of being a failure. So Ren unfortunately has to kill Felicity. And then when she is done, she walks out of the room, and Felicity's father, the captain, tells her congratulations and leaves without a single emotion or inflection in his voice at all. And Ren realizes how truly sadistic and evil these people are that they don't even bat an eye or shed a tear when one of their own, even their own flesh and blood, is killed. Ren is obviously very rocked by this experience, especially since she was the only one who was forced to kill her opponent. And Cross decides to be the shoulder that she can cry on. This was the part where I had a lot more disdain towards Cross, because characters like this one, who are so hardened and jaded and antagonistic towards everyone else, they turn around to the hottest girl in school and they treat her with the respect and decency that she deserves but no one else. This is seen as a positive attribute in a love interest like Cross. Because he's attractive, he's allowed to get away with a lot more things that other characters are not. This is the part that troubles me the most about characters like Cross, because he's given a lot more levity and grace than he really deserves. Characters like Cross are cruel towards other people who do not service them in the bedroom, if you catch my drift. The only reason why Cross is nice to Ren is because she makes little Cross happy because she makes him think with this head and not with this head. And I think there is something so shallow and superficial about their relationship that the only reason why they really get together is because they just think the other person is really pretty. You're not gonna be this good looking forever. Now, once gravity takes its toll, it's just all downhill from there. We'll just all just start looking like we're melting. It's natural. It's going to happen to the best of us, okay? But it's just crazy that in stories like this, we are almost taught, or I guess you can say conditioned by the author to look past this man's very obvious faults and all of these red flags to see him as this fascist with a heart of gold who actually does care about our main protagonist. That's not a good message to have, that, oh, Nazis are people too. I'm sorry, I think you're forgetting who the real victims are. The Silverbloods, who are being sent to labor camps, who are being shot by firing squads in the town square, whose deaths are treated like entertainment, who are being persecuted before your very eyes. But these people who are performing this act of ethnic cleansing, these are the people that we sympathize with the most, and not the people who are literally suffering. What's the thought process there? What are we doing? What is happening? Are the Nazi soldiers in the room with us? What is happening here? I don't understand this sudden Nazi sympathizer shift that we have going on in our modern literature today. This would be the equivalent of a young Jewish girl in a concentration camp having a relationship with a male Nazi soldier. People would drag that author through the coals. They would call this author out on being exploitative and distasteful, and rightfully so. That's the kind of cognitive dissonance that I'm seeing today. That as long as a man is good looking enough, he is allowed to do heinous, murderous, terrible things. Which brings me to my next point. So after this fighting sequence, they are still trying to impress their captains and the people who are running the Silver Elite, so they have to go out in the real world and do undercover reconnaissance type of missions. So this part was ironic to me because I was like, oh, this is perfect because now Ren can learn how to actually be a good spy undercover for the network. I thought that was a pretty good little sequence there, but it turns out that she learns nothing because she's a terrible spy. Shocker. Ren's entire job in this sequence is to go to this bar and pretend to apply to be a prostitute to the bartender, who apparently is the madam to her own little undercover brothel ring that she has going on. I had to fill in a lot of the blanks of what was happening in the scene by myself because God forbid Dani Francis does her job. She does not contextualize a lot of things in her story, and she leaves it a lot up to the reader's imagination, not in the good writer way, but also because she's lazy and she doesn't want to put in the work. In other books, I don't mind things being left up to the imagination or some vague points around certain trigger warning issues, but in here it feels like Dani Francis did not want to put in the work that was necessary to provide even more lore into the world that she has created, because it's someone else's world that she just copied and pasted and put into her book here. And during this interaction, Cross is actually at the bar and the madam of the brothel tells her that she should go try to seduce him. So she goes over there and she learns that he does come over there at the bar rather frequently, and she's making fun of him for being a bit of a sleazebag in that way. And he tells her, no, I don't need to pay for it. I can just get it for free. Very much like, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? Oh, so you're a cheapskate. Good to know. So she's sitting on his lap and his little Cross is getting very happy to see her there, and she calls him out on his boner. He tries to make a move on her and then she leaves the bar, which apparently is what she was supposed to do. That was the whole point of this entire interaction, was just to prove that she could follow instructions and to get Cross a little hard as well. So that was one of the weird missions on the outside world. One of the other tests they had to do was basically just sit there and wait for other people to rescue them. But she was paired up with Kane during this time, and the two of them were quite friendly at that time. They're very flirtatious. So they decide to not just sit there and wait and be rescued, but to actually rescue themselves. And they got in trouble for that because they weren't listening to instructions and they were potentially putting these other people in danger. Which that was the only part that I did agree with, is that if someone were to try to rescue you and you weren't there, they could possibly put themselves in danger. So I get why they were upset. And it also just proved that Ren was also just not a very good soldier. So I thought that part was funny. That she failed the easiest test, but then she came back and said, technically everyone else failed because they didn't rescue us. So I did like that interaction between her and the captain. Another test in the outside world was when Ren unfortunately had to turn in Tana, her best friend. So keep in mind, we We already disposed of one woman of color character, and now we're about to dispose of another one. Yay us. So Ren at this point was already privy to the fact that Tana and her father's inn was basically crawling with primary soldiers. They were being spied on, and this is one of the connections to the network, so they were very terrified that they were going to find the tunnel that leads to the network headquarters, if you will. So Cross and some of the other captains get this intel that there is something fishy going on in the inn, so they go to investigate. And Ren is tasked with going with them, and once she realizes that they're approaching the inn, she freaks out, and instead of telling Tana and her father to use the underground tunnel to escape to the headquarters, she instead tells Tana to turn herself in, like the abysmal, horrible friend that she is, because she does not want to risk her own life and her own mission to escape the academy, so she's willing to throw her friend under the bus for a good cause though. So it's fine. I personally could have thought of like at least 2 other ways to get her out of this, but don't worry guys, it's fine. Actually, she's more than fine. Even though her father was just shot by firing squad, she's in one of the best labor concentration camps there is. Yeah, they only have to work 12 hours a day. They get snack breaks. They have a nice bed. Actually, this is like a 5-star hotel once you really think about it. When I read that part of that book, I was shocked by this. I'm sorry, there are no nice concentration camps. Working 12 hours a day in a salt mine is grueling, arduous work, and you're trying to write it off so you can sleep at night? That was the minute when I knew that I was gonna give this book a 1 star. There is absolutely no redemption for Ren. She was a horrible person, and then she turns around and she's surprised that Tana no longer wants to talk to her and that she ghosted her.
You have invented a new kind of stupid, a damage you can never undo kind of stupid.
You cannot be surprised that this girl is mad at you. You forced her into a labor camp against her will. You basically turned her father in and got him shot and killed. Everyone knows that she's a silver blood, so she'll never really be able to leave. And now she's going to be under as much scrutiny as you, and someone probably took over her inn, and now she has nowhere to go. Because Tana is only there for 3 months. They don't actually know that she's silver blood, but she's basically being charged with harboring a silver blood because her father was a silver blood, and Ren told them that he was. This interaction was so maddening to me. This is the part where I got really frustrated with Ren, because she was more upset at Felicity's death than at Tana's displacement. Let me get this straight. Felicity, if she found out who Ren was, she would have killed her dead, no questions asked. She's more upset at her death than the fact that she basically turned her own friend in, an ally and a companion and a fellow silverblood, into a concentration camp. Do you honestly think that she will ever be free after that? No, she's doomed. And now they gave away the location of the rendezvous point for the network to take her mind off of things. Ren allows Liddy to give her some sartorial tips, and they dress up all nice and sexy, and they go to the pit to try to have a good time and celebrate this great find that they had. I do also want to note that she's also there with Kane. So she's there with Kane, they're flirting around, Cross gets very jealous, and then after his fight with his brother, he goes to Ren, who is visibly very upset because she just sent her friend to a concentration camp, but she can't really tell him what. She just plays it off, oh, she's still upset about Felicity's death, and he comforts her, and this is when they start their sexual relationship. According to Cross, he never sleeps with recruits, but he's willing to make an exception for her. Isn't she super special? Throughout the next few weeks, she's sleeping in his room and sneaking around. Ivy at one point does catch her coming out of his room because, again, this woman has absolutely no stealth whatsoever, and she's very concerned that Ivy is going to come out and say that she saw them together, but it turns out that she didn't. So Ivy, very surprisingly, is mature about this whole situation. She doesn't turn them in. She's very good at just keeping this secret, which I actually admire her for. So I think that made Ivy one of my favorite characters of this whole story outside of Tana and Fatima. Unfortunately for us, we don't get to spend a lot of time with these characters because in the following chapter, they have to go on a real mission. So on this mission, they're going to this airplane hangar. So a lot of weapons, missiles, etc. Before they get into this hangar, they enter this room that's like a psych ward. And in this psych ward, there are all of these fragmented silver bloods. So the silver bloods that kind of went crazy because they didn't use their powers or they couldn't use their powers. Now they're basically just in there being experimented on. Then they go into the hangar where they were told the rebels were and no one can be found. And this is when they realize that this whole thing has been a trap. And as they're going there because they believe that the rebels are trying to steal some of it, it turns out to be a trap. So during this attack, Ren is teamed up with Kane, Xavier Ford, who is Cross's best friend, and Xavier Ford's lover named Tyler. So we do have some bi representation here, which I did appreciate, even though it was very fleeting, because during the bombing, Cain and Tyler are killed. And after this attack, it is official. The primaries have now declared war on the Silverbloods, or the Modifies. So this is like 75% of the way through the book, and now things are starting to get really interesting. We've made it past the academy, and now we're going into real life battles. But before we can actually get into the war, Cross takes Ren to his house, the palace where his family lives. So while they're at their house, Ren meets Cross's mother. Now Cross's mother, like the fragmented Silverbloods at the psych ward, is also going a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, if you catch my drift. And she, like them, is very fragmented, and Cross plays it off like, oh no, it's just schizophrenia. But in Ren's eyes, it's the exact same thing. So she has a theory that the queen is actually a Silverblood, and this theory is actually proven right when she turns the corner and she sees a painting, the exact same painting that Wolf, her psychic pen pal, described to her. And she recognizes the boat that he described, and it wasn't actually a real ocean, it was an ocean in a painting. And then this is when she realizes that Wolf is actually Cross. She confronts him about this, and he confirms it. Yes, it is actually him, and he is surprised to learn that she is Daisy. So the reason why the two of them didn't recognize each other at first, because apparently your mind voice is different than your real life voice. And the explanation that Dani Francis gives us is that, you know, when you're making a video and your voice sounds a little bit different, that's the same here. It's a bit of a flawed logic, but I see what she's trying to do here. She was trying to set up the precedent of why these two didn't recognize each other outright. I think it's very flimsy world building, and even if we didn't have that, it was still very predictable, the fact that Wolf and Cross were the same person. But I digress. Once they find out that they're each other's childhood soulmates and friends, she approaches him with the idea, hey, maybe your mom is Silverblood and that's why you are Silverblood. Because this entire time he has also been concealing his identity, and he's very surprised to see that she is a Silverblood even though her veins don't light up. And so he is now overwhelmed with this brand new information that not only is his girlfriend his childhood pen pal, his mom could possibly be a Modified. A lot of information coming at him from all angles.
That's a lot of information to get in 30 seconds.
So this part of the story is incredibly significant because not only have we just identified Wolf's true identity, but now Ren is finally willing to open up and be honest with Cross/Wolf about who she really is. It is also at this point that she tells Cross/Wolf that she is not only a Silverblood who doesn't have the weird silver vein trick, but she also has 4 Silverblood abilities. One of them is telepathy, the other one is mind reading. I guess those are 2 very different things. She can also project images out from her mind, and she can also incite or manipulate people. Now at this point in the story, I was incredibly confused because we have been inside of Ren's head for 500 pages at this point, and she, for the first time, finally informed not only Cross but the reader that she could project images. We have never seen this girl once project a single hallucination, image, nothing out from her mind, but she always commented on when other people did it. Plus she said she had 4, and truth be told, mind reading and being able to project your thoughts into someone else's mind seem like the same thing, right? When you're psychically communicating with someone, you are picking up on their thoughts and then you are informing them your thoughts at the same time. So I don't know if those 2 things are meant to be distinguishable from each other, because if that was true, then technically most of the Silverbloods would have 2 powers. That was confusing to me. I was very confused about how some of the magic and the lore and the Silverblood abilities worked, because I feel like Dani Francis, whether or not she is real or not, was making this up as she went along, and she just threw in this extra special Ren is the fairest of them all trait in last minute to make her feel, one, way more special than anyone else. She's not like other Silverbloods, but also to add a little extra shock value, but it's very superficial. I don't like it when authors intentionally try to throw the readers off because their books are becoming too predictable. First and foremost, there's nothing wrong with being predictable. I predicted that Wolf was Cross, and it was still an enjoyable experience seeing them discover that for themselves. And then Cain turned out to be a rebel. I think the issue here is that authors want to appear smarter than their readers. It just feels like they're just throwing in these random bits of information and plot twists in order to try to keep the intrigue going. But in reality, when you have a plot twist of this one with this kind of magnitude, you really need to hint at that much later on. Because what I was thinking was that Ren, being an insider, is way more rare than in Silverblood having more than a few abilities. It was never really brought up whether or not it was rare that these Silverbloods or Modifieds could have multiple powers at once. We know that Jade Valance was a very powerful modified, but we never really got to see any other examples of modifies having multiple different powers. Since that was never really mentioned as an option, this revelation that Ren presents to Cross and by proxy the readers falls flat. And it just feels like Dani Francis threw this in just for shits and giggles and to also make Ren even more special than she already is, once again overpowering a main character when those powers feel unearned, especially for a character like Ren who is willing to sleep with the enemy, put her friends into harm's way, and do whatever it is possible to get herself out of a sticky situation by any means necessary. She's a very insufferable character, and it does make me irritated that characters like Ren are rewarded for doing absolutely nothing. Even worse, they're rewarded for completely abysmal behavior. Why does she get to have 4 different abilities when Tana does not? But you'll learn later on that there are other special Silverbloods out there, so at least Ren is not the only special one. She is not truly the fairest of them all because there are other insiders and other manipulators like her who are even more powerful or even more rare than she is, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So Ren and Cross basically bare their souls to each other, but Cross feels very overwhelmed by these brand new revelations that he needs to take some time for himself. And instead of doing the responsible and patient thing by waiting around, giving him some space and just letting him marinate with these ideas for a little bit longer, she decides to make this declaration of love to Cross/Wolf. And her declaration of love is her going to Ellis the healer to have him heal the scar tissue that was covering her blood mark. Now her blood mark is exposed, and anyone who could dare see it on her thigh is going to be notified that she is a modified. And guess what happens exactly 20 minutes after she is healed? Yes, that is correct. Liddy, her best friend, walks in just as she is changing, and she sees a blood mark and she confronts Ren about it, and then she finds out that she's a modified. Shocker. And this was the point in the book where I just lost all faith in Ren. Not only is she incredibly insufferable as a character, she literally puts her loved ones into harm's way. She sleeps with fascists who would kill her in an instant if they actually knew who she was, and the fact that she is currently sleeping with someone who commits acts of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Now she is also putting herself in harm's way, also she can prove her love and loyalty to her boyfriend. Babe, you cannot be this stupid.
It's so dumb.
So dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb!
I'm sorry, I will not allow it. It is illegal in my mind to be this stupid. Oh, this part was so frustrating for me, and this was a point in the story where I just completely gave up on it overall. It was bad enough with the fascism, but this was a straw that broke the camel's back. This was a point of no return for me, and honestly, I lost all faith in the series ever getting any kind of redemption arc, because if your character is so intolerable like this, I as a reader, I cannot root for her. I'm sorry, I'm rooting for her demise, if I'm being completely honest with you. What's the point of me even caring or being engaged in the story if I know that these terrible people are going to be rewarded for simply just existing and being special? That's all it is. That's a secret formula. I hope that is a trend that ends very soon. But anyway, back to the story. So Liddy comes in, and keep in mind, Ren has severely underestimated Liddy in the past, and she is also dumb enough to actually think that Liddy is going to keep her secret. Spoiler alert, she does not. So Liddy sees a blood mark, she's terrified, she realizes that Ren, her BFF, is actually a Silverblood. And then Ivy, Cross's ex-girlfriend, walks into the room and she looks at Liddy and she's, "What's going on, Liddy?" And Liddy's, "Ren's a Silverblood." Within 5 seconds, Liddy has already broken her promise to Ren to keep her secret. And it was at this point where I'm like, you gotta get rid of these girls, you know what I mean? Like, you don't handle them, but at least tie them up or something and put them in the closet and then go to the ball and pretend like nothing has happened. So before I move on, I do want to do a little bit of context here. The day that Ren decides to do this incredibly erratic and harebrained scheme to win Cross's true affection once and for all, it's also the day of their Independence Day. So there is this huge celebration. There's going to be a ball at the castle. Everyone is invited. The general's going to be there. He's going to make a speech with his family next to him. It's going to be a whole thing. And she also receives word that something's going to happen at the celebration when it comes to the network. So the rebels are going to try to do something, presumably to General, and we're going to find out what it is in just a moment. So back to Ren's little situation. So Ren begs her friends to not tell anyone her secret, and they both agree to it, even though Liddy just literally broke her promise that she would keep her secret, but somehow Ren still feels the need to trust her, which in my opinion is the worst possible thing you can ever do, surrounded by these people who have been radicalized and taught to hunt down the Silverbloods and then turn them in or even execute them on sight. I don't know what she expected to happen at the end of this. Again, this was a terrible decision, but of course Dani Francis threw this really dumb conflict in at the very end of the story, so that way we can end the story where she wanted to end the story. It was a very clumsy way that she was trying to write herself out of this narrative corner. Ivy leaves the room, and Ren is more worried about Ivy telling her secret than Liddy. Again, Liddy is the dark horse in this situation, not literally, just figuratively, and Liddy is the one who turns Ren in, but not before Jade Valance approaches her. So Jade Valance corners Ren, and she reveals that she knows that Ren is a Silverblood. Then she pulls out her gun and she threatens Ren. And Ren, who for some reason is magically able to use her insider abilities perfectly against the most powerful Silverblood there possibly is, she turns to Jade Valance and she tells her, put your gun up to your head and unalive yourself, which Jade Valance does with almost no struggle at all. Now she is dead. So Ren escapes that room and she tries to go find Cross/Wolf. And as she's doing that, she notices a familiar face in the crowd, and that face belongs to Adrian, the leader of the network. And Adrian is there, and as she is approaching the general who's making a speech at the time, Ren notices that the general is starting to act a little bit strangely, and he is jumbling his words. He's acting irritated, and then all of a sudden he just starts speaking gibberish. This is when Ren comes to the realization that Adrian, the network leader, is the person who can fragment people's minds and make them go crazy. And that's what she's doing to the general. So Ren approaches Adrian after the general collapsed, and everyone's just so focused on getting the general and finding out what's wrong with him and trying to get him to safety that they don't notice Adrian, and Adrian tells Ren, hey, I need to get to this rendezvous point, can you please take me here? At this point she's very conflicted because even though she knows that the general is bad, she doesn't like the way that Adrian took him out, making him go crazy. And it was also at this point that I lost all respect for Ren. Like, I had a very small sliver of respect for her even after the harebrained scheme that she pulled with her blood mark, but after this I was done. I was over it completely. And she thinks to herself, wow, maybe the Silverbloods are the ones that are the real bad guys. Not the primaries committing genocide, not her boyfriend who puts people into labor camps, not the people who rounds up men like her uncle and shoots them on sight for entertainment. No, it's the Silverbloods who can manipulate people to do things against their will to make people go crazy. Which one's worse? All is fair in love and war. And I get what she's trying to say here. I just don't think it was adequately done. It would have been very different in another separate sequence in which Ren is feeling a little bit upset at the fact that she has had to commit violence against this person, but Ren, you were backed into a corner. You had no other choice other than to protect yourself, because Jade Valance would have killed you if you did not get rid of her. And there's this whole thing where Ren was really battling within herself about who's really the good guy here. Is it us or is it them? It's one of those situations in which everybody sucks, but we are not clued in as a reader enough as to why Silverbloods are just as bad as the primaries, because at this point we are more privy or knowledgeable about the crimes against humanity that the primaries have committed. We only heard little passages about the fact that the Silverbloods enslaved the primaries, but we never got to see that with our own eyes. We've only witnessed the atrocities that the primaries have committed against the Silverbloods who have done nothing wrong, and now we're seeing them retaliate against that injustice, but the people who retaliate against the very bullies who force them into labor camps, they're the real bad guys? I'm confused. I don't know what this author is trying to say. There's so many mixed messages. This is where the book really lost me. I'm a pacifist through and through. I will choose peace over war any day of the week. But if someone is harassing you, targeting you, hurting you, and you just lie down and take it, how is that going to solve any problems? Unfortunately, we do have to take severe measures in order to not only protect ourselves, but to protect people around us. And I think that it's very unrealistic for Ren to expect the rebellion to to act like the good guys all the time. Because unfortunately, that doesn't always work. Sometimes they have to get their hands a little bit dirty. Plus, it makes it way more exciting. The thing about series like Star Wars, Luke and his rebellion friends killed people too, but you don't see them questioning any of that because, oh, it's for a good cause. I don't really know any other alternatives there are other than to use their powers to protect themselves. I don't know what Ren's strategy would be. I think she is starting to turn to the dark side, and personally, I don't really like it. So Ren does not go with Adrian for whatever silly reason, because again, she is the dumbest human alive. She's going back to the party to check on her boyfriend because her boyfriend's way more important than the rebellion. She gets caught by Liddy and Ro. So Liddy betrayed Ren, and she went and told Ro, who is way more sadistic than his other brothers are, and even his own father, and he calls her out in front of all the nobility, all the elite that are there at the ball, and then she is taken to jail. So Ren is in prison awaiting her trial, and during that trial, she is communicating to Wolf and communicating to Adrian, and Adrian is basically telling her, first and foremost, you probably should have come with me before all of this took place, but also she said, if you can find a way to escape and get to the Badlands and walk through to the other side, that's where we have our rebel base. If you can get to that place, then we can help you. And Ren, who is trapped in prison, is accepting defeat at this point because she's like, I can't break out. I don't know how to do that. Even though she can incite the guards to give her the key and break her out. For some reason, she doesn't even think of that. But then Cross has a change of heart. He comes and rescues her, and it's at this point that Ren learns through Cross that his brothers have taken their father's place as a general, and they are planning a full-on attack on the rebellion. And it's also during this time that they've decided to kill the Silver Blood loyalists. So the people who betray their own kind, turn against their own people, who have worked with the general to spare their own lives, are now being killed in droves because that's how fascism works, right? Even if you, as the pick-me of the marginalized community, try to align yourselves with these people who are committing this injustice, this prejudice, this genocide, they will turn on you immediately because you still are not one of them. You are still an outsider, and the minute that one of your own turns against them, they're going to take it out on you. Even though you are still on the other team, you are still not an equal because you're still part of that marginalized community, and that's what these loyalists don't really understand. At the end of the day, they're still going to be treated with disdain and discrimination, and they are still never safe because they are on borrowed time, and the minute that their superiors turn against them, it's over. So Cross is telling her this, and then the morning of her execution, breaks into her prison cell and takes her to the edge of the Badlands where they meet up with Xavier Ford. So Cross tells Ren that he cannot go with her even though he wants to because if he were to disappear, things would get even worse. Because Ro would basically be like a dog without a leash, running like crazy, doing whatever he so desires, and Travis, who is just as conniving, if not more than his own father, would just be left to his own devices. So Cross is basically there to act as like a sounding board and to try to cushion the blow and try to keep his brothers at bay as long as he possibly can and try to find a solution to end the war as quickly as possible. So Xavier and Ren go into the Badlands, and it's a 2 to 3 day trek. They go to the house that she used to live in with her Uncle Jim, and she finds letters that Jim left for her. She reads the letter, she gets very upset, she crumples them up, she throws them away. We'll talk about the letters in a minute, but Dani Francis doesn't actually tell us what the content of those letters was until the very end of the story, so that way she can pack an even more emotional punch the very last minute, even though for me, it didn't make sense. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So she and Xavier Ford finally make it onto the other side, and there is a fighter jet, the same fighter jet that miraculously disappeared during that one mission gone wrong where the hangar exploded and they lost a lot of their silver elite troops. It turns out that Kane was another rebel informant. Not only that, but he is a hotshot pilot who escaped during the bombing, got into one of the fighter jets and flew away. Now Ren is simultaneously relieved to see that he's alive, but she's also very angry, not only because he didn't tell her what was happening, but also because he let innocent fascists die. And Kane sets her straight and he says, if I told you, you would have found some way to try to prevent these deaths from happening, it wouldn't have worked out. We had to make it look like you had absolutely no idea what was going on because you're a much better asset when you're kept out of the loop. I would not feel very good about myself as a spy if I was told to my face that the only way that I can be way more indelible to a mission is if I don't know anything. Would make me feel a little bit bad about myself, but also make me do some self-reflection and try to figure out how to be more useful to the cause later. daughter.
I have recently taken a long look at the man in the mirror.
But Ren refuses to do that. She refuses to see how much of a liability she is to everyone around her. Everything she touches just is destroyed. It's awful. She is like a walking magnet for trouble. And it's not even fun to watch. It's just sad and irritating at the same time. This woman is so useless. It's honestly impressive at this point. And because Xavier Ford is not technically on their side, they him and put him in the jet. And then Kane tells Ren that they're taking them back to the rebel base. And then once they get there, they will update her on what's happening. And it turns out that Adrian is not the sole leader of the rebellion. That is where the story leaves off. And then at the very end, there's this little epilogue section, if you will, in which we read the letter that Uncle Jim left for her. It turns out that her parents betrayed their own people and then were killed in the crossfire of this one battle between the Silverbloods and the Primaries. And this is where Ren reveals herself to be one of the biggest hypocrites I've ever had the misfortune of reading, because when she hears that her parents were loyalists, she gets so mad that she crumples up the letter and throws it away. She feels so betrayed by this without realizing that she was starting to turn to the dark side herself. She was essentially dating the prince, right? Not only that, but she was also making friends with the other fascists at her academy. She was starting to see how the rebels were the bad guys in a way. So she was slowly, subliminally being indoctrinated and groomed into being a fascist in her own making. And I just thought it was very funny that Ren was so shocked that her parents turned to the dark side when she was this close to joining it herself. So I thought that was a bit ironic. I was thinking like the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree, and then the book ends. So that was the whole summary. I know that ran rather long. Let's move into my review. So obviously I rated this book a 1 out of 5 stars. It is 1-star book club, so it would be very surprising if it wasn't a 1-star rating. But like I mentioned before, I did not have a lot of high hopes for this one. I went into this book knowing that I would not like it, but I was actually genuinely surprised by some of the elements that I did appreciate. And one of those things I really did like was the author's use of foreshadowing. I think it was very effective, the way that Dani Francis left us little breadcrumbs to lead us to the conclusion, just giving us enough little substance and intrigue to keep us engaged enough in the story to at least see how these elements played out. And I definitely liked the reveal that Cross was Wolf, even though I saw it coming. I really appreciated the fact that Kane was not only alive by the end, but he also played a critical role in the resistance. He was my favorite character in the whole book. I was even more pleasantly surprised to see that he had a major role in the uprising. I'm sure there's plenty more of him in the next book. Apparently this is supposed to be a trilogy. I'm not entirely sure. That's what I've heard through the grapevine. There's going to be at least 2 more books, so we'll see how this turns out. My other favorite thing about this book were some of the minor characters. The only characters I really did enjoy were, of course, the ones that were not the main characters. I feel like that has been such a big issue with some of the books I've been reading recently, is that the background characters are way more vibrant, way more complex, way more entertaining than our protagonists are, which I think is a major crutch in a lot of literature these days, is that everyone surrounding our main characters has so much more to offer to the story that adds so much more flavor and fun and engagement. And that's mostly because the cast around them is way more diverse, not just in sexual orientation, but also in race. And I think that is a big crutch of books like this, that they lack the diversity, and when they do have it, they do not represent it well, and they treat these characters disposable objects. For example, Tana. I love Tana. I really like Tana as a character. She seemed to be really sweet, considerate to Ren, who, in my eyes, does not deserve her as a best friend. I also really liked Liddy up until the point that she betrayed Ren. I liked Ivy, who was a very mature ex-girlfriend to Cross. She was willing to put her own life on the line to keep a secret for Ren, the woman who is currently dating her ex-boyfriend. So I thought that was a really interesting character development of hers, that even though she did not start the book liking Ren, she turned out to be a really good character with a really nice moral compass and more loyalty than all these other characters had combined. Those are the only characters that really stood out to me. Everyone else was just awful, and I wish that the book focused more on characters like Kane or Tana rather than characters like Ren and Cross. Oh, and before I forget, I also liked Fatima before she died. I was really sad that she was unalived by Ro, because she was also a really cool character, and she was also another rebel on the inside, but I guess they had to get rid of her so that way Ren could swoop in and take her spot, because Ren, keep in mind, mind, she could have incited Ro to unalive himself and Anson instead of Fatima, but all of a sudden she just froze like a deer in headlights and for some reason could not incite all of a sudden. Kind of weird how that switches on and off throughout the story. It's almost like it's a plot device or something. So yeah, that was really disappointing. Okay, so now we talked about the two things I liked about this story. Let's move on to the things I did not like, which is basically everything else. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind people writing fan fiction to entertain themselves, right? Because a big point of writing is that you want to write the books that you would want to read. I totally stand by that mantra, but I also think it takes away from the complexity of the original material. And it also does seem superficial that the only thing she really wanted to add was more spicy scenes. And there was quite a lot of smut, I will say, in this book, which I, of course, skimmed right over. Not because I have anything against smut in general, but it's just the same scene over and over again. Wasn't very creative. They're all pretty generic. The spiciness levels of these scenes could be equated to a vanilla milkshake, in my opinion. If there was a devil's threesome, though, I think I would have given this a better rating. So one of the world building that Dani Francis included in these stories to make it a little more realistic or complex was to add some slang terms, colloquialisms to make it seem like its own special world, like the language had evolved over time. So she would have words like, oh, you're like smoke, or you're super smoke, to tell someone that they're hot. Wow, how creative. And then she also would call someone a quat for being like, I guess you could say the TWAT word or the see you next Tuesday term. I think that's what she was referencing. That's probably the closest modern equivalent to that term. It just didn't work out for me. I just thought those words were really annoying. I also thought that this book was a little too pro-gun, like Annie Get Your Gun kind of level of pro-gun. I feel like there is a medium where we get books like Fourth Wing where there are no guns, where it would make sense that we would have guns because it's a military college, but then we have books like this that involve way too many guns. I know it's a bit ironic that I complained about having no guns in other books and having too many guns in this. It's like a Goldilocks situation. You have to make it just right. Another critique I had about the uncle that I think I mentioned in the very beginning of this video was the fact that we were supposed to feel emotions and a bit of melancholy and sadness for this man that we never met who is going to die. On a human level, we can all feel for Ren, we can all feel really bad for Jim and the injustice that is being served to him. At the same time, I never met Jim. The only time we really saw him in person was when he was getting shot at by the firing squad. I'm sorry, how do you expect me to care for someone that I never met? The only time we really did get to talk about him or see him were in very brief flashbacks. And even then, it didn't really give me a whole lot to work with the character. We never got to spend time with him, so I did not feel bad when he died because he was just there. He was just the inciting incident to get Ren into the academy. That's all he was. He was a plot device. If you were to remove Uncle Jim and replace him with a completely different character, you wouldn't even notice. I also was a bit frustrated with the politics of this story because the underlying theme of this story was Nazis are people too, which I understand to a certain extent, right? I get what Dani Francis is trying to say here is that some of these people are victims of indoctrination. They are radicalized and weaponized against the Silverbloods, and they don't really get a lot of chance to really question that dogma that they grew up with. But then you turn around and you have scenes where Liddy, who is best friends with Ren, and Fatima, who is totally fine with them getting executed right in front of her because, oh, they're the bad guys. What are we supposed to do with that? Does she deserve a redemption arc? I don't feel like any of these characters have earned enough to get a happy ending for me at the very end of the story, because what we are seeing here is fascism at play. And we are humanizing the people who commit genocide more than the rebellion. The people who are facing this prejudice head on, the ones who are getting executed in the streets, the ones who are getting shot without a fair trial, the ones that are being rounded up in droves and sent to concentration camps. These people are the victims. And I think that Dani Francis forgot about that. And I feel like there is a way that we can draw on that and get them to humanize the Silverbloods, because they don't see Silverbloods as people. They have dehumanized them. They have robbed them of their autonomy and their humanity, and they treat them like animals. How do you fix that? Some people you can't. Some people just don't deserve to be saved. That's the harsh truth in my opinion. I don't like this rising trend where we're trying to basically dismiss and excuse these Nazis and what they are doing in these fictional stories. And we are excusing their behavior because, oh, but they're they're nice to me when they think I'm one of them. Okay, babe, good luck with that. How's that working out for you? Probably not very well. And again, I just didn't like how Dani Francis lost sight of who the real victims are because she wanted us to believe that both sides are just as bad as the other. We should have seen more of that at play because the network or the uprising, they're retaliating. They beget violence with violence. Okay, you attack our people, we attack your people. Neither of them are working towards a place of peace. We don't know if either of those sides have tried to come to a compromise or try to form an armistice or try to get the leaders together to talk things through. There's no evidence of that. And that's the only thing you can really blame the Silverbloods for is the fact that they're not trying to make peaceful retribution with the primaries. But then again, they're the ones being hunted down like dogs. So why do they have to put their best foot forward? This is not a trend that I see dying anytime soon because some people, they're willing to overlook it as long as you are a 10 out of 10 in the looks department. Man, pretty privilege is no joke, you guys. It exists and it is real. Another thing I critiqued earlier was some of the plot twists at the very end weren't very substantive because we were never truly led to believe or had any hints or questioned who Ren's real parents were. She never really thought about them all that much, so I wasn't really connecting with them and their story. She never really had any flashbacks of her parents. I don't know if that was due to the trauma of them dying, but it just seemed very strange that she barely talked about or even thought about her parents. And then the fact that she had 4 of the Silverblood powers and we only really got to see 2 or 3, that just didn't check out for me. And I think this is because at the end of the day, Dani Francis was trying to pull out too many plot twists all at once. Personally, I think a story, movie, TV show at any given point should only really have 2, 3 at the most plot twists at the end of their story. Because it's really hard to keep those conflicts and those mysteries and those clues intact because you are juggling a lot of things in the air and then you might drop a ball or two and then it's just not adequately done. There are a lot of really good plot twists out there in cinema and movies that only really focus on 1 or 2. And in this book, we had so many plot twists. 1 plot twist, Ren is a very powerful Silverblood with 4 different powers. 2, Cross is actually a wolf. 3, Kane is a hotshot pilot and is actually alive. 4, Fatima was actually a Silverblood all along. 5, Ren's parents were loyalists and traitors to their own kind. Like 5 plot twists, that is too many. Especially in a book like this, your story becomes way too convoluted and your reader is trying to catch up with this brand new information and they feel like you're pulling the rug out from under them. They can't really keep the story straight because they're trying to figure out the red herrings, the lies, what's real, what's not. And it's much better if you just focus on 1 or 2 plot twists, very similar to focusing on 1 to 2 plot lines or conflicts at once in a story, because then at the end of the day, you don't lose sight of what's really happening. And I feel like this is a big crux of this series is that books like this, who try to be written for adults or more adult audiences, thinking that in order to make their books more complex, they need more plot lines, they need more conflict. They need more twists and turns. They need more action and smut. When in reality, a story is stronger when it's simple and you draw on that and you make that very simple premise more complex by branching out, finding more creative ways of subverting these tropes and making it different than the other books that came before it. I always tell, even to my creative writing students, I could tell when they were trying too hard because they were trying to implement different plot lines and characters. And when their story ended, I had so many questions. I'm like, what happened to that character? That plot was unfinished. What happened to the dog? Where did this guy go? Did he ever solve the problem with his mom? There were all these questions because they were trying to add too many things in, and their stories got better when they only focused on 1 singular plot line, 1 character, 1 conflict. It got so much easier once you just got rid of all that filler. This book just feels very crowded, and it's too crowded, and it really does suffer for it because the author was focusing so much more on the ensemble cast, so we never really got to know any of these characters on a deeper level. And that's when it becomes a problem. This book fell into the trap of the disposable POC characters that we've seen throughout many other books that are way too whitewashed, in my opinion, and that also lack diversity. Fatima and Tana were immediately disposed of whenever they were no longer convenient to the plot, the story, or Ren herself. Another critique I have was that this new lore or new information about the history of that country included a biotoxin that was the aberrant biotoxin, and this lore was introduced really quickly and then just brushed under the rug. I'm sorry, are you insinuating that the aberrant committed biological warfare against the primary memories and we're just going to ignore that? Okay, moving on. What do you mean? That was the most interesting part of this entire story and it only got one little paragraph and then she just forgot about it for the rest of the story. Maybe we'll learn more about this in the sequels. I'm not sure. There are too many things occupying this book to where it becomes cumbersome, and really important, valuable, or interesting information is introduced and then left up to interpretation or just abandoned completely. Cut things down, make it simple, and then draw on the complexity from there. You're trying too hard, babe, and it's showing. The world building is non-existent. Anything that is brand new or added in is just not drawn on in a complex or thorough way. It's just copied and pasted from Divergent, and the reader is forced to pick up the slack where the author dropped the ball. It's lazy storytelling, lazy writing. I'm not here for it. I do not condone this behavior. This book needed to go through at least 5 more drafts before it got pushed out into the public. I understand why Dani Francis would use a pseudonym, because if my name was attached to this, I would feel pretty ashamed too. So to wrap up this review, I want to talk about the main issue that I have with this story, and I don't think it's gonna come to a surprise at all to anyone who has stuck around long enough to finish this video out with me, but sincerely, with the fiery burning passion of 1,000 suns, hate Ren and Cross. They are, hands down, the worst part of this entire story. Ren is a terrible spy who sleeps with fascists for fun. She literally abandons her friends in their time of need. Also, she can go hang out with her boyfriend, who is the biggest fascist of them all because he puts her own people in labor camps. She sold out her best friend of all time just so she can have more time with her boyfriend. She valued her boyfriend's feelings over her own life by burning off the scar tissue that kept her blood mark hidden. She put her friend in a concentration camp and then was surprised when she didn't want to talk to her anymore. And she sympathizes with fascists more than she does her own people. She is an awful human being, and quite honestly, she does not deserve a happy ending, at least not in my eyes. And Cross/Wolf is really no different. He calls her a bitch in the very beginning. He performs acts of ethnic cleansing and genocide to his own people and then acts like he's doing nothing wrong. And when Anson almost sexually assaults her, he breaks it up to act like a white knight and then still allows this man to be in the silver block. He doesn't do anything productive to get rid of this man who's a liability to the wing, who is hurting the woman that he has a crush on. Instead, he just lets him exist. No questions asked. No repercussions to his actions at all. I would be pissed. So anyway, that's it, you guys. This is Silver Elite. That's how I felt about it. That was the story in its total. I am exhausted. I am tired. I am not just tired of reading stories like this, but I feel like I'm reading the same story over and over again, and it's getting incredibly irritating. So hopefully my next book is a much more enjoyable read, but I will let you know. All right, you guys, that was the end of this video. Thank you so much to those of you who stuck around this long. Leave a black heart in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought of this story. Let me know the answer to your question from the beginning of this video. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this one, and I will see you next time.